Hello and welcome everybody to this SO-CHIC webinar. My name is Joseph Nolan from the European Polar Board, and today we will be hearing about the preconditioning, life cycle and large-scale impacts of Weddell polynyas. So we have four speakers for you today. We have Fabien Roquet, we have Aditya Narayanan, Aditya, Birte Gülk and Martin Mohrmann, all of whom are from the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. This webinar is connected to work package 4 in the SO-CHIC project. SO-CHIC is a Horizon 2020 funded project through the European Union. Just as a little bit of housekeeping before we get started, the webinar is being recorded and a copy of it will be available afterwards on the SO-CHIC YouTube channel. If you go there, you can also find recordings of previous webinars in the series if you want to look back to those. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A box. You should find a button for that at the bottom of your screen. If you put your questions there, it's a bit easier for us to manage them rather than in the chat box. But also, please feel free to use the chat box for discussion or to share any links to relevant papers or that kind of thing. That'd be very welcome. The audience, you're all currently muted and your cameras are turned off, so you don't need to worry about that. Yeah, I think that's about it. So I'll hand over to Fabien. Fabien, please.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much, Joseph. So yes, today we'll talk about Weddell polynyas. So I will start with the general introduction. So yeah, here you can see a reconstruction of the sea ice concentration in the Weddell Sea. So it's a reconstruction from the reanalysis product GLORIS 12. And you can see how the sea ice was on October 10th in 2017. And as you can see, there is a hole in the ice. That's what we call the polynya. And because it's in the region of mud rise, we call that the mud rise polynya. And the opening of this polynya has excited a lot of attention and will be the main focus of this webinar. So before we get to the polynya, let's start by giving a bit of background about what's the circulation in the area. So the Weddell Sea is found in the Atlantic sector of the Southern Ocean. It is characterized by the presence of the Weddell Gyre, so a subpolar gyre that is found south of the Antarctic circumpolar current that you can see by this red arrow here. And the Weddell Gyre is a very interesting system because, so for several reasons. One reason is that many very important water masses end up in this region or are created in this region. And so they get transformed by very intense air-sea fluxes. And in particular, we can name the Weddell deep water, which is this red arrow here, which is a flavor of a circumpolar deep water that enters the gyres from the east, bringing with it relatively warm water that stay at mid depths. And as you can see, when they enter, they will pass in that region with here the mud rise that you can see in the bottom topography, which will be a central feature that we will describe today. The Weddell gyre is also very important because it is associated with the largest production of Antarctic bottom water. You can see these blue arrows here originating from the Antarctic continental shelf that represent formation and downwelling of this Weddell Sea bottom water that eventually may become Antarctic bottom water and may be found in most of the ocean basin of the world ocean. So to talk about this, the formation, the process of forming Antarctic bottom water, so polynyas are central in this process. But there are different types of polynyas. So in the normal regime of formation, it is done over the continental shelf through coastal polynyas associated with very intense sea ice production and brine rejection that will then form the dense shelf water that later mix with various water masses, and in particular with the circumpolar deep water when you reach the shelf break, and that will then downwell along the continental slope to form the Antarctic bottom water. So here, the sea ice formation over the continental shelf is absolutely key to producing the necessary convection and to densify the water. So this pattern, which is really the base pattern for Antarctic bottom water formation, is in competition with another process that is happening more rarely, which is that sometimes in the Weddell Sea, we may see the formation of open polynya. So you can see these arrows that represent deep convection from surface to various depths. So when it's very intense, it's been observed up to 3,000 meter depths, which will mix together the surface water with the warm circumpolar deep water and bring the heat from the circumpolar deep water right at the surface, and therefore then producing large heat flux in the region. And this open polynya, when it happened, they shortcut conventional pathway. And once the convection is initiated, it's going to be driven by surface cooling. So the processes involved in those polynya are quite different from the coastal polynya. Now let's get back to our polynya in 2017. Here I prepared a short animation of sea ice superimposed on the sea surface temperature. Again, this is a reconstruction from the GLORIS 12 reanalysis. And we will start in 2015, which was a year without polynya, so showing a pretty typical cycle of formation and melting of sea ice. Then in 2016, we saw already some peculiar features. So you can see here the sea ice is forming, but is quite delayed. And later in the season, around August, you can see very briefly that the ice around Mohrmann got much thinner. So the polynya was formed, although pretty weak. And then continuing in time, you can see later in the season the formation of some peculiar feature, some sort of polynya that we can see, observe also in satellite data. So this is pretty unusual, although that may happen from year to year as part of the variability. But the real peculiar feature happened in 2017, and especially in November, in September and October of 2017. Here you can see the polynya that is formed that will never close until the sea ice is melting. So it is definitely not the first time we observe polynya in this area. In fact, we observed much larger polynyas that were named Weddell polynyas in the 70s, from 74 to 76. 3 years in a row, we observed here 1, 2, and 3 large convective sites associated with polynyas. And these polynyas started in the Mohrmann region, but then they started to get advected westward. And you can compare these polynyas with the one observed in 2017 here. And you see in 2017, it's much smaller. but still it's quite significant. So we are getting closer to a Weddell polynya, but never reaching that state. And the very strange thing is that we never observed large polynya, large Weddell polynyas again since 76, so which is almost 50 years ago. And so that raised the question of why. So associated with the opening on Weddell polynya, there's large exchange of heat and carbon with the atmosphere. You can see here profiles of temperature taken in the central Weddell Sea before, so 73, and after 77, the large Weddell polynyas. You can see on this profile that water was up to 0.5, even a bit more than 0.5 degrees Celsius at depths before the polynya, but then all this heat has been extracted back to the atmosphere, and we are left with a profile that is significantly less than 0 degrees Celsius in the year following these polynyas. And this, of course, goes also with large change in salinity. The salinity getting smaller as a result of the convection. So this may have potentially large impact on climate, and it is even thought that it might drive multi-decadal variability at the global scale. So these are potentially important features, not only for this region, but more globally as well. So why did it not open in the last 50 years? There has been some work on this, and one central hypothesis has been made, is that the climate change has increased the stratification in salt in superior region, mostly because of increase in precipitation rate. And we can see here a construction of the haline stratification in the Weddell Sea, taken from this paper from de Lavergne et al. And the hypothesis is that because of this increased stratification, it is becoming harder or even impossible in the future to reopen Weddell polynyas. And this is a prediction that is also made by most climate models. So here we can see that by 2100, climate models are predicting an almost complete shutdown of the convective activity in the Weddell Sea. Now, the problem with this prediction is that it relies on climate models that are often using pretty coarse ocean resolution. And we may wonder if these models are able to predict correctly the future of the Weddell Sea circulation. And in particular, we know that ocean models have the greatest difficulties to correctly represent the stratification in the Weddell Sea. Here we see typical observation along a section along the Greenwich meridian of a potential temperature and salinity. And we see the typical structure with cold winter water capping the warm circumpolar deep water, and this circular deep water being also associated with higher salinity. Now, in most ocean model, there's either too much open ocean convection or not enough, or not at all. And the problem is quite often that convection might go up to the bottom, leaving the stratification of the model as is shown in, on the right, with basically a temperature near the freezing point down to the bottom, very saline waters from surface to bottom, because the deep convection has extended to most of the Weddell Sea, which is never observed and probably quite unrealistic. And we can trace back these difficulties to the fact that there is a very bad representation of dense shelf water production and then Antarctic bottom water production along the slope, the Antarctic slope, in those models. So that's not the only reason why those models have difficulties. they usually have insufficient resolution, and that may lead to a pretty large bias in the stratification that is represented. So here you have the comparison between the stratification in a 1/4 degree resolution and on the right, 1/10 of degree resolution model. And each time, so is as a function of time, we see the change in temperature and salinity within 200 years. And we can see when we compare the two that in the 1/10 degree resolution, we have a much stronger halocline, which enable the accumulation of a warm circumpolar deep water, because then convection happens much less often than in the coarse resolution model. You can see that from the red curve. Coarse resolution, the convection happens almost every year, while in the higher resolution, convection is very rare. But when it happens, of course, it's much more intense. You will reach deeper, and therefore the way it will extract heat from the ocean will be much more abrupt than in the coarse resolution model. Finally, the resolution might be very important also to represent horizontal features, fine scale features, and in particular around mud rise, which is a region where there's a very large interaction between the flow and the bottom topography. If we have a model that is not sufficient resolution, of course, we will not be able to represent well what is happening there. And in particular, you can see on this plot showing the sea surface height in GLORIS 12, that at a 1/12 of a degree resolution, the model predicts the existence of a retroflexion west of mud rise, which is associated with a warm halo, and we will hear more about it in the presentation later. And it is thought that this particular circulation pattern might be very important to reproduce correctly the formation of polynya. But obviously, we need at least 1/12 degree resolution, or even better if we want to capture correctly this kind of fine scale structure. So finally, what are the big questions? Well, how likely is it that a major Weddell polynya might open in the next decades? This is really an open question, and we need to get better observation and better knowledge about the circulation in those regions in order to get more robust answer. Then a big question is, what are the processes controlling the formation and persistence of mud rise polynya? And finally, what has been the impact and what will be the impact of the recent polynya on the ocean and more generally on the climate? So in the following, we will get several short presentations reporting on some preliminary work from Aditya, Birte, and Martin. And then I will present our strategy for the work package 4, and in particular, briefly present the plans for the fieldwork that will start this year in December.
Hello, everyone. I'm Aditya. I'm a postdoc here at the Department of Marine Sciences, Gothenburg University. And today I'm going to be talking about what conditions led to the opening of the polynya in 2016 and 17, mainly relying on a reanalysis product, the GLORIS 1/12 degree model output. So what were the events in the ocean interior leading up to the polynya? Were the two polynyas similar in terms of the internal ocean dynamics? And finally, something that I will just touch upon, but not really go into detail because we have not yet done the work. It's more about the impacts of the polynya. So I'll begin from with the hydrography over the mud rise. So this is over the center of mud rise. What you see is from the GLORIES 1/12 degree reanalysis, which assimilates observations. We'll hear more about this from Birte. So what you see in the plot is the potential density that is plotted in against depth, and these are daily fields. And it has been spatially meaned over the center of Mohrmann. You see the region in the map at the bottom here. You also see the sea ice concentration in the panel above. And you notice during 2017, the spatially average sea ice concentration over the center of Mohrmann is really low during the occurrence of the polynya. And what you see below is the mixed layer depth. This is the maximum mixed layer depth over the entire region, the box that you see here. So there are some convective events that happen at different locations in and around Mohrmann. And what you see during 2017 is this really persistent and widespread polynya event. So what some of the features that we notice here in the potential density plot is a progressive shallowing out of the pycnocline. You see a seasonal cycle where the pycnocline deepens during winter due to the formation of sea ice and brine rejection. And then during the seasonal sea ice melt during summer, you see the pycnocline shallowing out again. But imposed on the seasonal cycle is a longer-term trend across multiple years where you see the pycnocline progressively getting shallower, and it reaches its shallowest extent in 2017. Another feature that really jumps out at us is this high-density waters that we see in 2018 following the polynya, and I'll talk a little bit about it as a few slides later. If we look at the salinity, again, we see that associated with the polynya, the formation of the polynya, we see a freshening that extends quite deep into the water column, and associated with the higher density waters found in 2018, we see higher salinities as well. And if we look at the temperature, this is the potential temperature. Again, you see a seasonal cycle on the surface. You see summertime waters, which are quite warm, underlaid by cooler winter waters. And below this, you find warmer waters that are present almost across all the seasonal cycles. So this is the circumpolar deep water, which is a warmer water that is found in this region at these depths. And some of it is able to intrude over the Mohrmann Taylor column as well, although it is cooler than the surrounding waters. And you see that associated with the vertical mixing during the formation of the polynya is also this cooling of the interior ocean that extends quite deep into the ocean. And it remains cool in 2018. In fact, it looks even cooler. So just to show you that this is not something that is picked up, the higher density waters that we see in 2018 is not just found in the reanalysis products, it's also found in the from the floats, Lagrangian and tagged seals data. So these are the location of profiles, the color indicating the year during which these profiles were observed. And you find the same hydrography here from the floats, potential density in the upper panel, salinity and temperature. And again, you see higher density waters associated with higher salinities, but not really much warmer than the previous years. In fact, it shows cooler temperatures than some of the previous years. So really, this higher potential density that we see in the interior is caused by the higher salinity waters. Now, I'll talk about some of the dynamics that led to the hydrography that we see, and for this, I'll rely on potential vorticity. Potential vorticity is a product of vorticity and density gradients. Why do we use it? It's a quantity that represents the stratification. It's conserved along isopycnals. It's a tracer that's unaffected by changes in depth and regions. And if you track the budget, the forcings of the potential vorticity, you can also retrieve the forcing of the three-dimensional flow field. When I talk about the budget of potential vorticity, I'll focus on buoyancy fluxes, that is JB, stresses at the surface, that is JF, thermobaric effects, that is JTherm, and advection of potential vorticity, that is J advection. This illustration shows us some of the processes involved in the fluxes of potential vorticity. So if you have surface buoyancy losses or gain due to maybe heating or cooling, or you may have freshwater fluxes at the surface that leads to buoyancy changes, buoyancy fluxes. You may also have winds that blow either down or up or front. So this may lead to Ekman transport of denser waters over lighter waters, having a destabilizing and effect that would destroy potential vorticity, or it could be the other way around, with lighter waters being transported over denser waters, which would then strengthen the stratification and strengthen potential vorticity. So the final panel that you see below the hydrography is the potential vorticity. The black curve is the total potential vorticity, spatially meaned over all the grid cells over MODRISE. It's mapped onto the right-hand y-axis. So you see a seasonal cycle in the total potential vorticity. The black curve, the magnitude of this black curve becomes smaller, as in it goes closer to 0, which implies that stratification is being destroyed. And you see that this is associated with the production of sea ice during winter. So sea ice formation leads to destruction of PV, or it has a destratifying effect. You find the PV weakening and then strengthening once again when the sea ice melts. So this is a seasonal cycle, but again, imposed on this, you find that PV is becoming more and more weak. There's a slight reduction in PV, and it reaches its lowest extent in 2017. Associated with this is the buoyancy flux. You see the red curve here, which is a bit stronger during the years preceding the polynya, and it's the reason why you find the pycnocline shallowing out. The high buoyancy fluxes that cause the destruction of potential vorticity, or they have a destratifying effect in this case, this is associated with the shallowing out of the pycnocline across the years prior to the polynya. During the 2 years, 2016 and 17, you see weaker buoyancy fluxes. And again, this could be because of the weakening of the sea ice production due to heat supply from below that has a inhibitory effect on the buoyancy fluxes from sea ice formation. And finally, during 2018, something interesting here is that along with high buoyancy fluxes, you also see the advective term and the thermobaric terms showing up as well, indicating that the increased salinity and increased density in the interior is because of high buoyancy fluxes, as well as some advective terms in the deep ocean interior. This is something that we have to look into further, but it's really interesting to see that combination of both surface fluxes and advective processes in the deeper interior ocean have resulted in higher salinity and density waters. Now, two other regions, so the flanks of the MODRISE are also important because of the warmer waters that you find there. And I'll not spend much time here other than just pointing out that you find the same shallowing out of the pycnocline in the northeast of MODRISE as well as in the southwest of MODRISE, where you actually find the lowest extent in almost complete destruction of the surface stratification. And this is averaged over quite a large area in the southwest of MODRISE. I'll end with some of the questions that this raises. So what drove the interannual changes in buoyancy forcing and sea ice production? What were drivers behind the interannual variability in heat that is available in the underlying circumpolar deep water layer. What does the rest of the region look like, why did the region around Mohrmann salinify and densify after 2017? All right, so I thank you. I'll stop with that, and I'll pass it on to Birte.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Birte Gülk. I'm a PhD student here at the University of Gothenburg, and I started 2 years ago. I'm in my second year. And my work in this project is high-resolution modeling of the Mohrmann area, and we want to tackle the questions of which processes control the emergence and the persistence of the Weddell polynya, and which processes are controlling the polynya during its life cycle, and how are different dynamical processes interacting in the area. So at first I will start talking to you about the GLORIS 12 and the validation we did, because this GLORIS 12 product is quite a key product. We need to validate our configurations we will set up. So it's the Mohr 12 and the Mohr 16, which are the configurations we're setting up, yeah. And then I will talk about the halo and the Taylor column, something Fabien mentioned before. And I will also present some results of the Mohr 12 product and give an outlook. So the GLORIS 12 reanalysis product is an Orca configuration, so which is based on NEMO. And GLORIS 12 is not just a model configuration, it also assimilates observational data as CTD, Lagrangian floats, and satellite data by using a Kalman filter. And GLORIS 12 provides horizontal resolution of 1/12 of a degree with different timescales, so we can have daily fields from it. And we validated the GLORIS 12 output with some observational data from the EN4 dataset, which is provided by the Met Office Hadley Center. And we compared daily profiles of two floats with the of GLORIS of the EN4 with the GLORIS dataset. So you can see the two positions indicated here with the orange star is the first position in the Western Weddell Sea, and also with the purple star on top of Mohrmann. So starting with the profile on top of Mohrmann, you see we have a reasonable agreement between the GLORIS 12 and the EN4, so the red and the blue line. And we also used the SO-CHIC data set, so it's the Southern Ocean State Estimate. So we have a slight difference here, but it's in general known that the SO-CHIC is at some points cooler and fresher than other products. And we also have the same agreement for the position here in the western part of the Weddell Sea. Yeah, a good agreement. And we also looked at a mean of 4 years, so from the SO-CHIC and from the GLORIS 12 product. In this figures, you still can see the seasonal cycles, but in general, it looks good and it looks reasonable, so there are no weird things going on. And with these things, we assumed that the GLORIS 12 product is very reliable, and we can use it further for validating our configurations. And we also looked closely into the hydrography on top of Mohrmann. Therefore, we just used mean profiles just on the center of Mohrmann. So we see here in the temperature profiles, we see that before the polynya, so lines before the polynya, we have the dot, and then we have a warmer interior ocean, and then in 2016, the green lines before and after and during the polynya, it's getting fresher. Even in 2017, when we have the strong polynya event, and after in 2018, we have the coldest ocean interior. And as you've seen before in Aditya's profiles, in the center, we have the most saline area in 2018, and also in the stratification, you can see this effect mentioned earlier. And also during the polynya, you see a less stratified water column due to the deep convection. And I will now talk about the warm halo and the Taylor column, so which is a feature which is often observed on top of mud rice. So yeah, here in the plot you see the bathymetry of mud rice, and on top you see a cold, or the blue colors, which indicate a cold heat content for the upper 600 meters, and around this you see some warm regions, warm heat content, which we call the warm halo. And if you look into temperature profiles, you also see the same things, that you have on top a very warm water mass, and then something in between, and below the coldest is the Taylor column. So we think this is a result of circulation and topographic interactions, which is one of the categories we think is one of the most important processes to lead to a polynya. The other ones is the external surface forcing, like storms, and the vertical mixing processes and convective instabilities. And one key question is the trigger, if the surface salinification driven by sea ice production or subsurface convective instability is a reason, and we also have the question of the probability of occurrence in the future, and how the structure and the dynamics of the warm water halo changes. So I've been setting up a NEMO configuration, just a regional one, and the region we use for the configuration, if you look at the bathymetry here in the figure, you see the Antarctic ice sheet here, and you see the mud rice, and the white line indicates my model domain. And for this domain, I've used the ocean and ice component of the model of NEMO, and set up two configurations, one with 1/12 of a degree horizontal resolution, which is approximately 4 kilometers between each grid point, and also one with 1/60 degree resolution, which is approximately 800 meters in this area. The model has 50 vertical levels, and the forcing is done with data from 1993 to 2017. And the surface forcing is, we used the JA55 dataset, and at the boundaries we used the Glorus product because we said it's good for our analysis. And the initial state, the temperature and salinity, and the ice is derived from Glorus. In the plot below, you see an example of how one outer forcing rim looks at the boundaries. So we have the southern rim at the eastern part, the northern part, and the western part for the temperature. So you have some idea how we force the model. And I will now show a comparison of one Mod 12 configuration and the Glorus. So you see Glorus 12 on the left and Mod 12 here. We have some similarities, and the Mod 12 configuration is able to produce some polynyas. And yeah, so this is the current configuration. We still have some things to do on it, but we're progressing. And also, if we compare now the Mod 12 to the Mod 60s, we have two different snapshots of the ice growth. So on the left here, you see the sea ice concentration again and the bathymetry of mud rice. And on the right, you see this on a 1/60th degree resolution, and you see a lot more small scale features around here. And we think that these small scale features and sub-meter scale features are quite important to get a polynya in the model. And so currently we are still conducting several test runs to fine-tune the parameters for the ice and improve the ice representation, but we're still happy with what we've got so far, and every test run we did showed this halo. So on the left you see the mixed layer depth with the bathymetry of mud rice, and the red line indicates the 15% sea ice concentration. And you can see with this polynya we have a deep convection, And on the right, you see the maximum temperature below the mixed layer depth, and we have this vitrification or warm water halo in here. And we also checked if it's if we see it in years where we don't have a polynya. And here's an example for with a closed ice cover. So we don't have deep convection at this point, but we see an even stronger halo and a stronger vitriflection. And this means that the vitriflection appears in the model all year round, independent of the occurrence of the polynya or not. And yeah, we hope, as Fabien showed before, that going to a higher resolution, we get even better results and it's more reliable. And the sea ice concentration and the mixed layer depth agree already well in this snapshot here. So we have the polynya and we have the deep convection, and also here a higher sea surface temperature. And one thing we can see in the sea surface side is again the vitriflection. And finally, the future work in this work packages is continuing with the mod 60s configuration and conduct sensitivity runs to test the hypothesis about the external surface forcing, the circulation and topographic interactions, and also the vertical mixing processes and convective instabilities. And lastly, we'll also calibrate the model with the SO-CHIC observational data. So thank you so far, and I hand over to Martin.
Yes, thank you, Birte. So my name is Martin Mohrmann. I'm a PhD student here at the University of Gothenburg since more than 3.5 years already, looking at the polynya. So that's why I'm not directly associated to the SO-CHIC work package, but of course it doesn't keep me from collaborating with the other experts around. So now I'll give you more of an observational view of the more dries and the polynyas. For our work, we deployed 2 vertical profiling floats. And the aim there was to better characterize the water masses of this tailor cap on more dries and the warm halo around, and how there's a frontal transition and the mixing and how that is contributing to the low sea ice halo around the more dries and the mixing at the flanks. So toward the left, you see a map of the more dries now with the trajectories of the 2 different floats that we deployed. One of these floats was deployed in late 2018 and drifted towards and over the more dry topography along this northern flank here, and then almost all the way around the more dries. The second profiling float was deployed in early 2020. And it's been drifting away from more dries and southwards. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to call this firstly deployed float that is drifting over the more dries float, and the other one the reference float, because it's not so much influenced by the more dries topography. Here at the bottom, you see the complete temperature contour plot data from the more dry float. So it's 2.5 years of data, and you see after deployment below the mixed layer, so below around about 200 meters, the water was relatively warm, up to 1.2 degrees Celsius. And then while the float was drifting towards more dries over shallower topography, the water gets colder. And in the start of 2020, that's when the float is here, very close to the, or at the northern flank of the more dries. The water properties are very warm again for 3 months, and then it's cold again. And you see there's nothing comparable in the start of 2021. So this is not a seasonal effect, but it's actually the effect that is mostly caused by the topography of the more dries and the different water masses of the tailor cup and around. To illustrate that, I show 2 the right, this plot with the single profiles from the more dry float. And I color these profiles by the depth of the underlying bathymetry. So based on this eTopo data set that I also used to draw the map to the left, the profiles are colored, and you can see that there's a very strong correlation between the bathymetry depths and the water properties, and this this colder and fresher water is the more dry deep water under the mixed layer, and the warmer and saltier water is the warm deep water. So the boundary or the limit of this more dry deep water, we found at around about 3,500 meters bathymetry depth. That's how these profiles are clustering up. So if I color, so you can see now in the blue color around about that's the position of the Taylor cap with the colder water, and around is the water, the warmer water, including the water of the warmer halo. What you also see in the profiles is that some profiles are very wiggly. I highlighted those in the black color, and they are really transitioning between the warm deep water properties and the more dry deep water properties. So there's a lot of intrusions of the different water masses into each other. And that is different to see this mixing happening, because that is a process that can potentially bring heat into the more dry region. And those also, of course, contribute to the formation of the polynya. Also on the bottom panel, you can see I overlaid the temperature plot with pycnoclines, so the lines of equal density. And at the flanks, those are very steep. So there's a very much a deepening of the pycnocline from the more dry deep water properties into the warm deep water properties. This means eventual intrusions from one water mass to the other would not only mean a lateral transport of the water, but also a vertical transport. And as you can see how steep these pycnoclines are, this can span over several hundred meters. To quantify these intrusions, where they are happening, how much, we use a method that is called the diapycnal spiciness curvature. Could I please see the next slide? Get the next slide. Thank you. So here you can see now a comparison of the diagrams of spiciness of the more dry float and the reference float that's been not on more dry. And yeah, spiciness is a great method basically to differentiate between two water masses of equal density, but one is cold and fresh, and the other one is warm and salty. We use this spiciness curvature as a quantification of like how much past mixing might there have been in the water, because over time through diffusion this spiciness contrasts would even out. And yeah, the result of this analysis you can see here in the panels B and E, and this spiciness curvature plots here. And you can see that in general the spiciness curvature over more dries is substantially higher than for the reference float. That is especially true along the flanks of more dries when the float was transitioning through this front. And that is very interesting because that way we can see like on which places heat is entering the Taylor cap, and we've seen a higher spiciness curvature in the eastern region of the more dries and the lower spiciness curvature in the western region of more dries. So the next slide, please. to summarize, we seen that the flanks of the more dries were also the fronts between the warm deep water and the more dry deep water, and there's been in general a very high significant correlation between the bathymetry and the water properties, and this correlation is much stronger than any seasonal dependence in the intermediate water depths below 200 meters. The threshold between these different water masses is along round about 3,500 meters bathymetry depth, and we've seen an increased amount of intrusions on the water of more dries. Since these intrusions also mean lateral water exchange, that means like on this places heat can enter the more dry region. And as you see, since the isopycnals are sloping over so much vertical distance, this means also vertical heat transport. This vertical heat transport can either happen from the warm deep water upwards into the almost the surface layers of the tailor cap, which could be an explanation for the low sea ice hollow and the formation, or could contribute to the formation of the polynyas. And of course, it also works the other way around, from the denser tailor cap water under the lighter warm deep water, and this lift up the isopycnals, and those might be a possible explanation of the shallowing of the mixed layer that we observed previously along the flanks of more dries. So this is it from my side, and I will give back to Fabien for the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Martin. Okay, now we can finalize this webinar with a bit more information about strategy and the fieldworks. That will be short. Yes, please change the slide. Yeah, so the work package 4 is about abrupt large polynya events, shortcutting conventional pathways. And so the main goal is to assess the balance of physical processes controlling the emergence and persistence of Weddell polynyas and their key large-scale impacts. So this work package is led by Alberto Navarra-Garabato and I. Alberto, unfortunately, couldn't be here with us today. Yes, please, next slide. So what about the fieldwork? So we plan to go over Modrise in December 2021, so this year, on board the research vessel Algulas 2 from South Africa. And there will be deployment of a few buoys and floats, but also, most importantly, 4 mooring lines will be left there for 1 full year and recovered in December 2022 on board the Polar Stern, if everything goes well. And we also plan to leave a glider there in collaboration with Sebastian Swart from University of Gothenburg also. So we can get some absolutely new observation, very fine scale result observation over the Modrise flank, please. So about the moorings, so there will be 4 mooring lines. Each of them will have ADCPs, current meter, CTD, temperature. The main originality is that the 2 middle moorings, M2 and M3, will be placed only 1 kilometer apart. So the goal is to get the fine scale and mesoscale processes resolved directly from the mooring, and so hopefully better assess what scales the flux is. what happened. Sorry, my screen went black. So yeah, that's the main originality. And so the moorings will go up to about 100 meters from surface. So we hope then to reach the mixed layer in winter. So we will get first results then in early 2023. So which is very excited about. Please, next. So yeah, there are 4 main objectives to this work package. First, produce the first systematic observations of the polynya controlling processes. Then to quantify processes that underpin the polynya's life cycle and moderize stratification. And from there, we hope to develop mechanistic synthesis of the polynya's life cycle, and also to establish the baseline requirements for its realistic representation in models. And finally, we hope to determine the impacts of polynya events on the large-scale circulation. So as you've seen today, we've already gone some way to fulfill some of these objectives, but all of this is, of course, still very preliminary. So we hope that in the next couple years, we will make some very good progress. Okay. So with this, I want to thank you all, and thanks to the 3 other speakers for this webinar. And okay, Joseph, you can continue.
Yes, thank you, Fabien. Thank you, everybody. We have a little bit of time for some questions. We're due to finish on the hour, but we will maybe extend that a little bit to fit in some of these questions. There has been some that have already been answered in the Q&A box by our speakers, but I think it might be nice to just read those out, and then we can maybe add a little bit more discussion to them, and also it'll be captured on the video recording as well. So the first one is to Aditya, and this is from Julius Lauber, who says, in your figures, one can see a clear lag between the mixed layer depth and the sea ice concentration during the 2017 polynya event. And how can that be explained?
Yeah, so maybe Aditya, do you want to answer?
So thank you for that question. And the trivial answer is that the MLD figure was a maximum value over the entire region, whereas the hydrography and CS content were averages over only the center of Mohrmann. But what is interesting is convective activity sort of sporadically occasionally shows up in and around the region, and it's not always associated with the formation of a persistent and larger scale polynya. And this is a region that is sort of primed with a weaker stratification. And we are looking into this. It's something interesting, and one thing that we will be looking at is if this is just something that's coming from the models, or is it also supported by actual field observations.
Thank you, Aditya. There was a further question also from Renuka about the productivity of the polynya and the impact on the ecosystem in the Southern Ocean. I know that this is not a specific thing you've focused on, but maybe you have a comment or two.
Yeah, so it's something we have not really investigated at all. It's a very interesting question, though. There's actually a paper that Ethan Campbell pointed out that speak exactly about that. So it's Berg et al. 2020. Yeah, so please check out this GRL paper if you want more information.
Yes, thank you. There is also not so much a question, but Lars has posted a link to further information about CI thickness data.
Yeah,
So if
thanks,
you're interested
Lars.
in,
We will definitely check that product.
so I have a question myself, seeing as, thank you, Julius. I think there's no new ones to come in just yet, but you spoke about how the bathymetry of the moored rise is potentially quite critical to the polynyas and the formation. But is the available bathymetry data at the moment, is it of sufficient resolution, and is that a limiting factor in the investigations?
That's a good question. I mean, there's been some cruises over the years there, so, but I don't know how much the current topography relies on, if there's been specific scanning of the bottom topography. Now, I still think from my experience that especially in a region like this, like in the middle of the ocean, the topography that we get, which is a mixture of ship data and satellite measurements, is good enough. Of course, it could probably be improved, but I don't expect it to be a major limiting factor in our study. That would be much more problematic if we are interested in processes on the continental shelf.
Yep, okay, that makes sense. Good. If anybody has any further questions, I think now is your last chance, and I'm sure oh, we've got one just as I said that. Okay, from Hartmut Helmer. Surface freshening can also be caused by enhanced precipitation. How do you deal with that?
Yes, absolutely, and that's the key hypothesis, that surface freshening has been occurring within the last 30-40 years, and that it might explain why convection is maybe much harder to produce right now than it used to be. It's the surface freshening, so can come from enhanced precipitation. It can also derive from the melt of the ice sheet, and maybe also collapse of icebergs that will bring their fresh water. So yeah, this is definitely something that we need to investigate. There are observations showing that indeed the surface has been freshening, and that the haline stratification has increased over the last few decades. Yes, so we don't plan to have specific observation from SO-CHIC about that in the motorized region, although there are another work package dealing with air-sea interaction, which hopefully can improve our measurements of the freshwater budget. But it is definitely in those regions, freshwater flux is always a major driver of the stratification.
Great. Thank you. I think as we have run over the end of our allotted hour, I think we will wrap up there. So thank you very much once again to Fabien, Aditya, Birte, and Martin for their presentations, and thank you everybody for the questions and for your attention. As I said, this webinar has been recorded, so you'll be able to catch up and share it with all your friends via YouTube later on. That should be appearing in the next few days or so. And there will be more webinars coming in this SO-CHIC series, so keep an eye out for those. And also later in the project, we will hopefully the later webinars will include some of the results and the observations from the cruises that Fabien was outlining. So stay tuned for that as well. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. I think we'll call it a day there.
Thank you.